Time is a river that flows only in one direction, carrying our memories and our mistakes along with it. We revisit the moments that changed everything, capturing the essence of time through beautiful 3D cinematic visuals. Hit subscribe now and let's explore the past and future together.
I spent 34 years as a court interpreter, and the one thing that job taught me, above everything else, was to listen without letting your face move an inch. You learn to sit perfectly still while someone confesses to something terrible. You learn to translate words that make your stomach turn without blinking once. You become a window, invisible, just glass between two worlds. I never imagined that skill would be the thing that saved my son. My name is Raymond, and I'm 67 years old. I live in the same house in Tucson, Arizona, where I raised my boy Daniel after his mother passed. It's a good house. Modest, but good. The kind with a porch where you can hear the desert at night and feel like the world makes sense. Daniel is 31. He has his mother's laugh, the kind that comes out of nowhere and fills a room. He works in logistics, drives a sensible car, calls me every Sunday without fail. I don't take any of that for granted. I know what it means to have a son like that. So when he called me on a Thursday evening last October and said, "Dad, I want you to meet someone," I felt something loosen in my chest. Something I hadn't realized had been tight. I told him to bring her over for dinner that Saturday. I'd make my pulled pork, the recipe his mother left behind in her handwriting on a note card I've kept laminated in the kitchen drawer for 19 years. Her name was May Shu. She went by May. Daniel showed up at my door holding a bottle of wine I didn't recognize, and she walked in beside him, smiling the kind of smile that knows exactly what it's doing. She was attractive in a very deliberate way. Hair done, posture perfect, voice modulated just slightly softer than natural. I noticed all of it and told myself I was being a suspicious old man. She handed me the wine with both hands and said, "Mr. Raymond, Daniel talks about you constantly. I feel like I already know you." I thanked her and we sat down to dinner. The conversation was pleasant. She asked about my career, which I described briefly. When I mentioned I'd been a court interpreter, she nodded with what seemed like genuine interest and asked which languages. "Spanish primarily," I said. "Some Mandarin in the earlier years. The Mandarin's rusty now." I said it casually, the way you mentioned something that no longer matters. She blinked once, smiled again, and said, "Oh, how impressive. I wouldn't have guessed." That was the first thing she said that made me notice something. Not what she said. How quickly her expression had reset. Most people, when they hear something surprising, take a half second before their smile returns. Hers came back faster than that. But I was holding a spatula, and my son was looking at her like she'd hung the moon. So I set the thought aside and served the pork. The evening went on. Somewhere between the second and third glass of wine, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, said something brief to Daniel about a friend checking in, then switched to a quick voice message she recorded in Mandarin. I was at the sink with my back turned. The Mandarin was fast, colloquial, not textbook, the kind you only know if you've grown up with it or spent years immersed in it. I understood about 90%. She said, "My boyfriend's father is some kind of translator. Old. Retired. Watch what you say around him. Actually, no. He said his Mandarin is rusty. He probably can't follow anything real. Don't worry." Then she laughed, soft and private, and switched back to English to tell Daniel she was sorry. Just a quick thing with her girlfriend. I kept washing the dishes. My face didn't move. 34 years of standing in a courtroom translating other people's most desperate moments had built something in me like a vault door, and I closed it right then, quietly, without a sound. I set the dish down. I dried my hands. I came back to the table and poured myself more water and asked May if she'd grown up in California, because I thought I heard a Bay Area cadence. She looked slightly startled, then said, yes, she had. "Fremont." "Great city," I said. "I worked a case up there once. Early 90s. Beautiful area." She smiled, and the conversation moved on. But I heard it. I heard all of it. And I started paying attention in a different way. Over the next few weeks, Daniel brought May around twice more. She was consistent, polite, engaged, asking questions about the family history, complimenting the house. She helped clear the table without being asked. She sent me a follow-up text message after each dinner thanking me for having her over. She was doing everything right, which was in itself something worth noting. People who are genuinely comfortable don't perform comfort that consistently. They relax. They forget to be charming for 20 minutes while they're looking at their phone. They don't ask the right question at exactly the right moment every single time. I mentioned my observations to my old colleague Walt, a retired investigator I'd worked alongside in the federal courts for over a decade. We still had lunch every other Friday at a diner on Campbell Avenue. I told him what I'd noticed. I told him about the phone call I'd overheard. Walt listened without interrupting. That was one of the things I always appreciated about him. He never rushed to reassure you that you were wrong. He said, "What do you know about her?" "Not much," I said. "She works in real estate." She told Daniel she has family in Fremont. "Parents still there," she said. "Have you met them?" "Not yet. Daniel mentioned they might come down for Thanksgiving." Walt set down his coffee. "Let me ask around." I told him I didn't want to be that father, the overbearing one who can't let his son have a life. Walt said, "You're not asking me to do anything. You mentioned something. I heard it. That's different." 3 days later, he called me. "Her name is Mei Shu Lian," he said. "She has a record of 2 civil suits. Both involved men she'd been in relationships with. One settled. One was dropped. In both cases, the complaint was financial. One man claimed money transferred out of a joint account. The other alleged property was sold without his knowledge during what he believed was a committed relationship." I sat with that for a long moment. What happened to the men? One moved out of state. One didn't respond to any follow-up. Both were in their late 30s to mid-40s. Decent income, no prior legal issues. I thanked Walt and sat in the kitchen for a long time after I hung up. The pulled pork note card was in the drawer 3 feet from where I was sitting. The handwriting on it was my late wife, Carol's. Careful. A little slanted, with a small heart drawn at the bottom that she added as a joke the day she wrote it out for me. I thought about what Carol would say. She had better instincts than me about people, always did. But I knew, sitting there, that she would say, "Be sure before you do anything," and then be sure again. So I waited. Thanksgiving arrived. May drove up alone. Her parents, she said, had had a last-minute conflict. Her father had a doctor's appointment that couldn't be moved. She was so sorry. She'd already told them so much about Daniel, and they were devastated to miss it. Daniel accepted this without question. He was gracious about it, told her it was completely fine. They'd do Christmas. I watched her face when she said it. There was something in her eyes that wasn't disappointment about her parents missing the holiday. It was something more like relief, moving through quickly, then covered. After dinner, while Daniel was in the other room, she offered to help me with the dishes again. We stood at the sink together and she talked about how wonderful Daniel was, how grateful she was that he was so patient and kind, how different he was from other men she'd dated. I said, "He gets that from his mother." She made a sound of sympathy about Carol, asked a few careful questions. Appropriate ones. I said, "Daniel tells me your parents are looking forward to meeting me." "Oh, they really are," she said. "My mom has been asking about you ever since I told her you were a translator. She loves languages. She'll probably talk your ear off." "Where in Fremont did they settle originally?" I asked. "I'm curious because I knew a family from that area." She didn't miss a beat. "Near the Irvington district. They came over in the early 90s. "Your mother's family from Guangdong?" I asked it in Mandarin. Casual. Like I was just following a thread. She turned to look at me. Then she laughed, that deliberate, warm laugh, and answered me in Mandarin. "Yes, Guangdong." "You do still speak it, don't you? I thought you said it was rusty." "Languages come back," I said, still in Mandarin. "Like riding a bicycle. You don't forget." She switched back to English and said, "That's so true." Then she handed me the last dish and excused herself to use the restroom. I stood at the sink. My face hadn't moved, but something had clarified for me in that exchange. Not just about her, about myself, about what I was going to need to do. I called Walt the next morning. I told him what I needed. He connected me with a woman named Sandra, a licensed private investigator based in Phoenix with a background in financial fraud. She was direct, professional, and she asked exactly the right questions. Over the following 3 weeks, Sandra confirmed what I had already half known. The parents in Fremont were real people, but they were May's aunt and uncle, not her parents. Her actual parents were in Hong Kong. The story of them being warm, Mandarin-speaking immigrants, eager to meet Daniel, was constructed from whole cloth. More troubling, Daniel had recently, at May's gentle suggestion, added her to his shared savings account for convenience while they were looking at apartments together. The account had a balance of $41,000, money Daniel had saved since he was 22 years old, carefully, the way his mother had taught him. Sandra said, "This is a pattern she's run before, and she tends to move fast when she's in a financial position to do so." I said, "How fast? Weeks, not months." I spent one night in the kitchen with the light on, just thinking, not panicking, thinking. I'd spent my career in rooms where everything was at stake, and the only tool I had was precision, saying the right thing at the right moment in the right words. This was no different. I called Daniel the next morning and told him I'd love to finally meet May's family. Maybe we could do a dinner at my house? I'd love to cook for them. Something special. Daniel was delighted. He mentioned it to May that same day. She called me that evening, directly, which surprised me. She said she'd love that. Her parents were free the following Saturday. They were so excited. Her mother had already been asking what to bring. Her voice was warm, and her timing was confident. I said, "Tell them not to bring a thing, just themselves. I'll handle everything." I asked her as casually as I could if her mother preferred anything in particular, any dietary needs I should know about. She said, "Oh, she eats anything, very easygoing." I said in Mandarin, "And what about her Cantonese side? Any dishes she grew up with that I should try to include?" There was a pause, very brief, almost nothing, and then she said in English, "Oh, she'll love whatever you make, honestly." She had paused. A woman whose mother was genuinely from Guangdong would not have paused. She would have answered in Mandarin, or laughed, or given me an actual dish name. The pause told me everything I needed to know about the people she was bringing to my table. I spent that week cooking and preparing, and I also spent it on the phone with Sandra, with Walt, and with a contact Sandra had at the Arizona Attorney General's office who handled financial fraud. I laid out everything clearly, the way I used to lay out a case in translation. No embellishment, no editorializing, just facts and sequence. They told me what I could do, and more importantly, what I needed to wait to do. Saturday came. May arrived with 2 people she introduced as her parents. Her mother, a small woman named Helen, and her father, a tall man named George. They were warm, gracious, spoke accented but comfortable English. They complimented the house, the smell of the kitchen, the garden out front. Daniel beamed. I shook George's hand and said in Mandarin, "It's wonderful to finally meet you. May has told us so much about her childhood with you both. I'd love to hear more about Guangdong. I worked with many families from there during my career." George hesitated just slightly, then smiled and said in Mandarin, "Yes, of course. It's a beautiful place." I nodded and said, still in Mandarin, "Which city specifically?" I asked because there's a family I knew professionally, the Wests from Zhongshan. Wonderful people. I always wondered if they ever went back. Helen answered before George could. "Oh, we were near Foshan." George, simultaneously, "Near Guangzhou." A half-second of silence. May was watching me with a very careful expression. I smiled, entirely relaxed, and said, "Of course, Foshan and Guangzhou, practically neighbors. Beautiful area." I switched back to English and asked if anyone wanted water or something warm to drink before I put the food on. We sat down to dinner. The conversation was pleasant. George and Helen were good. They were consistent, careful, attentive. They asked the right questions. Under different circumstances, I might not have caught them at all, but I was a court interpreter for 34 years, and I have sat across the table from very practiced liars. I know what fluency looks like versus what rehearsal looks like. I know the difference between someone who lived somewhere and someone who memorized the zip code. Midway through the meal, while Daniel was in the kitchen getting more bread, May said something to her mother in Mandarin. Rapid, quiet, clearly thinking I either wasn't following or wouldn't understand. She said, "He keeps asking about Guangdong. Either he's just making conversation, or he suspects something. Either way, stay on script. The account access should be sorted by the end of next week." I set down my fork. I looked at May. Directly, And then I replied in Mandarin. Clearly, I understood every word of that, including the part about the account. The table went completely silent. May's face did something I had never seen a person's face do before in my life. It didn't fall, it sort of fractured all at once, like a windshield hit from the outside. George and Helen exchanged a look that confirmed everything. I said calmly in English, so Daniel, who had just reappeared in the doorway holding a breadbasket, could hear everything. I spent 34 years as a court interpreter. My Mandarin was never rusty. I told you it was because I wanted to understand what you actually thought of me, and I did. Daniel stood in the doorway. He looked at May. He looked at May, he said, very quietly. Dad, I know this is hard to hear, I said. But sit down. He sat. I told them everything, calmly, in order, the way I'd learned to present information in a courtroom, the civil suits, the timeline of the account access request, the fact that George and Helen were not May's parents. I said it all without my voice rising once. May tried to speak twice. Both times I waited for her to finish, and then I continued. When I was done, the room was very quiet. Daniel asked May if any of it was true. She looked at him. She opened her mouth. She closed it. That was its own kind of answer. The rest of that evening is something I'll leave private because it belongs to Daniel more than it belongs to this story. He handled it with more maturity than I could have, at 31. He was hurt. He had every right to be. But he was clear-headed. He asked me afterward, when it was just the two of us on the porch, how long I had known. I suspected after the first dinner, I said. I was certain after Thanksgiving. He said, why didn't you tell me? I thought about how to answer that. Because suspicion isn't the same as proof, and because you deserve to see it for yourself. He was quiet for a long time. And then he said, how do you just sit there and not say anything for weeks? I thought about the note card in the kitchen drawer. About 34 years of courtrooms, about every moment I'd ever spent translating someone else's truth into a language someone else could finally understand. You learn, I said. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is listen and wait. We sat on that porch until nearly midnight. The desert was cool and quiet the way it only gets in October. And somewhere out beyond the yard, a coyote called once and then went silent. He put his head on my shoulder briefly, the way he used to as a small boy. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The formal matter was handled through Sandra and the AG contact in the weeks that followed. May did not contest the civil complaint. The account was frozen before any transfer was completed. The men she'd done this to before. I hope, wherever they are, that something like this reaches them so they know it didn't work every time. Daniel took some time for himself after. He went to visit his college roommate in Denver for 2 weeks and came back steadier. He started going to the gym again. He called me every Sunday without fail, the same as always. One Sunday, about 2 months later, he said, I've been thinking about something you said, about listening. What about it? I think I'm going to get better at it. Good, I said. Did Mom teach you that? The patience thing? I thought about Carol, her careful handwriting. That small heart at the bottom of the note card. She taught me most things, I said. The rest the job filled in. He laughed. That laugh that sounds just like her, coming out of nowhere. And I sat with it for a second before I laughed too. There is no version of this story where I am some kind of hero. I'm a 67-year-old retired interpreter who is lucky enough to have the right skills at the right moment. I am also a father who has made plenty of mistakes over the years and will make more before I'm done. But I kept my son from losing everything he'd worked for, and I did it the same way I did everything for 34 years. I listened. I waited. And when the moment came, I said exactly what needed to be said. That's enough. For me, that's more than enough. If you've ever had a moment where something felt wrong before you could explain why, where your gut was sending a signal your brain hadn't caught up to yet, trust it. Investigate quietly. Be patient. You don't have to set the fire. You just have to wait for the smoke. The truth has a way of rising to the surface on its own. Your job is just to make sure you're there when it does. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually means to protect someone you love. Not the dramatic version, not stepping in front of a car or pulling someone from a burning building. The quiet version, The kind that costs you sleep and asks you to hold your tongue when every part of you wants to speak. What happened with May didn't end with the dinner. It ended weeks later, in paperwork and phone calls and a frozen account, and my son sitting on a porch in the October dark with his head on my shoulder. That was the real ending. Not the moment she went pale. Not the moment I said I understood every word. The real ending was quieter than any of that. Here's what I've come to believe. After 67 years and 34 of them spent in courtrooms translating other people's most desperate moments, the choices people make have weight. Not supernatural weight. Not some cosmic scoreboard. Just the ordinary mechanical weight of cause and effect. May spent years refining a particular skill set, a system for reading people and exploiting their trust. That system worked, until it met someone who had spent an equal number of years developing a different skill set entirely. Patience, precision, the ability to hear without reacting. She didn't lose because the universe punished her. She lost because she miscalculated. She assumed that a man her age, quiet and polite at a dinner table, was an easy target. She didn't account for what 34 years of professional listening does to a person. That's not fate. That's just the math of underestimating someone. And Daniel, my son, who is better than me in most of the ways that count, he lost something real in this. He lost months of trust he'd invested in a person who didn't deserve it. That hurt is legitimate. I don't minimize it, but what I watched him do with that hurt tells me everything about the man Carol and I raised. He didn't collapse into bitterness. He took 2 weeks in Denver. He went back to the gym. He called me every Sunday. He said he wanted to get better at listening. That's resilience, not the motivational poster kind. The quiet, unglamorous kind, where you just keep showing up to your own life after someone tried to take something from you. The thing I keep coming back to is this. Intelligence without integrity is just a more sophisticated way of causing harm. May was smart. She was genuinely smart. But she used every bit of that intelligence in the service of taking from people rather than building anything real. And the result was that every relationship she touched turned into evidence against her. Meanwhile, Daniel is out there somewhere right now, building something real. Slowly, carefully. The way his mother taught him to save money. Not all at once, just a little at a time, until one day you look up and realize you have something solid. I'm not a wise man in any formal sense. I'm a retired interpreter from Tucson with a laminated recipe card and a porch I sit on too late at night. But I know this much. The person who listens more than they speak, who waits for the right moment rather than forcing one, who builds their life on something true, that person doesn't need luck. They just need time. And time, in my experience, has a way of sorting things out.